So welcome everybody. I'm Joey Mason, moderating the panel today. Wear a couple of hats at the conference today. Half of it is with Claret Capital, which is a venture debt provider. We do life science investing, early stage growth companies when they're revenue generating. I also am a venture advisor with Softnova Partners in Ireland, which is really related to today's topic. And Softnova has a range of, I'm sure everybody knows who Softnova is. It probably doesn't need too much introduction. So on that note, speaking of introductions, I'll introduce the panel. Maybe Eamon, you give us a quick overview.
Hi everybody. Eamon Brady, CEO of a acute heart failure company called WhiteSwell. I've been in medtech for 30 odd years. This is my third startup. So looking forward to the discussion today.
Caroline Gaynor, so partner with Lightstone Ventures. It's a US venture fund, though we invest globally. I sit in the Dublin office and try to source European deal flow. Also have a role in the IVCA, which obviously is trying to promote venture investing within Ireland and the startup ecosystem.
Hi everyone, Wayne Allen. I am the CEO of a company called Perfuze, clinical stage, heading to commercial stage, interventional device company. 20 years in medtech. This is my second startup. Looking forward to the conversation.
Super. Well, the topic is the Irish advantage, that we're a hub for international growth. And I guess when people ask us, when's a good time to start a hub, it's a little bit like planting a tree. 20 years ago was the answer. But if you're looking at it now, well, what do you do? And before we go into it, we had a bit of prep before this. We had a list of questions. And just going to throw a quick curveball over. Explain to people what Enterprise Ireland is, because they're a thread that goes through absolutely everything that's involved in the Irish medtech sector and has for the last 30 years. And for those of you who don't know it, it's essentially a semi-state government body that is made up of a bunch of smashed in, research foundations, financing. And it has been a thread that's gone through everything that has pulled or supports a lot of the sector. So quick thoughts on just to explain to you, what is EI? I'm starting it from the premise that you just couldn't make it up. Like, you could not start with a white page and say, or a blank sheet and say, we're going to design EI. You wouldn't. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. So how did they get here, and why is it such a big part? Eamon, you go shoot.
I think to put Enterprise Ireland in context, it's important to think about kind of overall Irish industrial policy over the last 30 years. There are two organisations, the IDA and Enterprise Ireland, and the IDA look after kind of foreign direct investment into Ireland. So they've been very successful at pulling in large corporates and bringing them into the country. And then Enterprise Ireland has a different mandate. They're more focused on serving the needs of the indigenous sector within Ireland, and they do everything, as Joey says, from supporting the colleges, supporting kind of research centres, grants, all the way through to equity funding, and even investing in some of the venture funds as well. So everything to do with supporting the Irish indigenous sector falls within Enterprise Ireland's domain, and they're very focused on kind of thinking about the hub and the development of the hub, and what are the gaps and how can they be innovative as the company, as business moves forward in the country.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with all that, obviously. But, when you think of EI and the Seed and Venture Scheme, that I think if we were to go way back, that was kind of the genesis of really putting a focus on Ireland, on startups, on entrepreneurs, and creating that ecosystem. And, there were various other factors. It wasn't just that alone. But, EI, I think to date, are one of the biggest seed investors in Europe. They still maintain that. And, in my own role, when I left pharma and started trying to navigate the startup space, it was EI that you meet every step along the way, be it spinning out of university, be it as a female founder even, and equity to help you get on the ladder from that perspective, or just cash and help and support and introductions. They really feed into every single part of the startup journey, and especially for, try to support people who maybe don't necessarily know what they're doing, right? So, and guiding you towards different pots of money. So they are really integral. I think they're the first person you meet in your journey, and they stay with you then the whole way through. Obviously, different factors take over as you move along, but Without them, I don't think we'd see half as many starting, frankly. I think they do provide that starting point.
Wayne?
Not much to add to that, really, but I give you my own personal experience. I've raised 6 or 7 rounds now over 2 companies, and EI have been in every single round, so that's kind of what they are. It really matters early days, I guess. They're writing 6-figure checks when no one else will write them. I don't know if you want to introduce BioInnovate now, but
sorry, perfect time. That's actually all part of it. That's why it's a really hard organization historically to explain how it got to where it is, but it's core to how Ireland, the system in Ireland has worked and how it's developed over the last year. There's loads of other things as well, but EI is core. So go through.
Yeah, and I think it's worth giving a bit of context as well. Like, I work in the US a lot. We're engaged in big studies in the US. When you talk to Americans about Ireland and you get into describing the country, like, they're quite surprised. 5 million people, you can drive from like west to east in 2.5 hours. It's kind of, I guess we definitely punch above our weight in medtech based on the size of the country and its capability. But without the likes of Enterprise Ireland, you couldn't have, I guess the likes, myself and Caroline came from the BioInnovate program. So just quickly give you the genesis there. So it's based upon Biodesign Stanford. However, it's very much like an Irish model, right? You cannot compare Galway to Stanford. It's incomparable in lots of reasons, for lots of reasons. So, but Enterprise Ireland, we're the key founder of that. That was 2011 was the first year of BioInnovate. And I guess if anyone's not familiar with that model, basically you get a small team who live in a hospital for 10 months. You try and find an unmet clinical need and you try and form a company. That's basically it in a couple of sentences. So like I said, Caroline and I came from that, and Enterprise Ireland got that off the ground. Yeah. And when you finish BioInnovate, that's a 10-month program. Guess what? They're waiting for you there for a commercialization fund. When we started in 2011, 2012, we got 350k. I believe now it's 800 or 900k. So now you've got, and when we used to engage with the biodesign folks in Stanford, and they couldn't believe this. You got basically 3 years worth of runway. It's not a huge amount of cash, but you're buying time, right? You can pay yourself 50 grand, keep the lights on at home, and spend 3 years and go and do an animal study and get a couple of patents.
Yeah, and I think that's part of how I was thinking about what it basically it underwrote BioInnovate. It continues to underwrite it. It invented the commercialization fund to essentially fund BioInnovate, which causes consternation around the country, but that's what it was for. And the reason, these are all non-companies. The commercialization fund is for university-based projects because of state aid rules in Europe. So you can't give $1 million to an early startup without, ownership and all the rubbish that goes with that. And so I found this very creative solution. And I've reviewed a bunch of the commercialization fund applications, as I'm sure you guys do too. They're really complex. I met some guy in reimbursement today, an expert, and I say, actually, the Com Fund applications talk about reimbursement. Like, these are essentially commercial ready projects, and that's the whole point of getting the 900 to $1 million. And EI basically made the policy, and I don't think many countries can do that. And partly it's because we are so small. There's 5 million people. So, but it's by the way, another bit which no one mentioned is it's a competitor conference, but without them, there wouldn't be that conference. It was dead. And it was dead actually after a disaster here just 11 years ago. Yeah. And they brought it to Dublin, and now it's in the calendar in April, end of April, early May. Every year, half the world and the medtech world comes to Dublin, and they do other things. Medtech Innovator does their only non-US program out there. So, I mean, again, they underwrote it. They wrote the first check. They brought it in for 40 grand. It's like without that, it wouldn't have happened. Yeah. So there's the team. That's it. If I'm thinking of how do you do it again, you kind of need to find something like that, because none of us can do this all by ourselves. We have our different roles. So speaking of, where do things stand at the moment in Irish medtech? If you took a snapshot today, Wayne, do you want to have a go? I mean, you're BioInnovate alum. You've raised lots of money. You've got lots of background on the industry side, but where do you see it now from your perspective?
I guess I think it's constantly evolving. If you look at the genesis of it, you could nearly take it by the decades. I think we're moving now, I think, into the next kind of phase. I think there was a Provirum round announced a couple of weeks ago. It was $80 million. I think that represents it. That's a huge round. It's a commercial round. They're going to the US. They're trying to get market leadership. You got some serious investors in there. So that's the direction it's going in. 10 years ago, that wouldn't have happened. I was looking at Eamon. We're in the stroke space. Eamon's previous company was in the stroke space. We were like, okay, if you raise 25 million, you try and take a shot at exit. But now these companies are raising 80, 90, 100 million, and they're trying to go all the way. So I think that's the direction it's heading in. It used to be all very Galway-centric, West-centric. It's kind of spread around the country now. So we're moving into connected health, AI, other spaces. Before it was all cardiovascular catheters. That was kind of the origin of the space. And now you can see it spreading out into other towns and other areas. So that's kind of the next phase. It's hard to see these when you're in the middle of it, but that's where I would guess.
Great. Eamon, from the kind of, I call it repeat offender end.
I think one thing that I'd layer into the evolution of the hub in Ireland is the manufacturing capability, and the large corporate sector is of fundamental importance. I think in any hub, you have to have large corporates that anchor talent, and they anchor all of the supporting companies around about those. And, in Galway, that started off with Sierra Bard, now Medtronic, and Boston Scientific. But, you take the top 15 medical device companies in the world, they all have manufacturing operations in Ireland. And that means that you have a very large pool of talent that is anchored in the country. And I think that's a huge strength of the hub over the years. It's also a potential weakness as we move forward. And then to kind of follow on from Wayne's thinking, I think if you were looking at output today, I would say probably 85 or 90% of product sales from Ireland are coming from the large corporate sector and not the startups. And that's because, the startups up to now have been kind of getting to a point and exiting. And now we're moving into a phase where startups are raising larger rounds of funds. They're going into commercial phase. And I think the next phase of evolution is where you start to see companies become, I call them Irish multinational, kind of indigenous Irish multinational companies. And I think there'll be a lot more of those as we move forward. And I also think the difficulty getting companies off at earlier stages is the factor in driving the industry in that direction. You've got to go further. Yeah. You've got to go deeper into commercialization. You've got to deal with reimbursement. You've got to deal with commercial challenges in order to exit companies. I think that's also a factor in just driving us in that direction.
Yeah, we're forced in that direction.
We're forced.
No other choice. Yeah. But a good example there of a company becoming a multinational is Airgen, right? So they're doing 150 million. Probably an Irish medtech unicorn in the making.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
So perfect example. Market leader for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Caroline, you've obviously a different perspective from actually broadly. I mean, you've got the BioInnovate background. You have you've been working with the US VC as the Irish sort of person on the ground. And now you've got the overall view of what's going on in venture as chair of the IVCA. Where do you see it today, and kind of your thoughts of where it's come from?
Yeah, so look, I think from a medtech hub perspective in Ireland, we're doing really well. I mean, I also work on the biotech side, and we'd kill to have any of this infrastructure. There's numerous reasons why it hasn't worked as well on the biotech side. But I think you're right, having the big, large corporates here, if you can get them doing the R&D and get them involved in that ecosystem and being able to pull talent out of there, it's huge. There's a lot of talk, and in the IVC in particular, we think, we need more scaling capital. We need bigger local funds that can write some of these big checks, be less reliant on the international VCs. And that's part of the problem for sure. The other sort of issue that I'm not sure we get around is the number one launch market still for most of us here will be the US.
Yeah.
And until Europe, and whether Europe can or ever will, become a valuable competing option for that. And it used to be. I mean, It used to be. So it's not to say we can't go back to that. But I think scaling capital is part of it. But at the end of the day, you got to be where you're going to launch. Or whether the HQ needs to be there, we can debate. It probably does not. And that probably is a feature of having international VCs who are US based wanting the HQ to be in the US. But, that's what we have to figure out. It's how to get more money into local VCs and what strategies we employ to do that. I feel the last 10 years, because of various coalition governments, there's been no big policy moves. I mean, I felt the Irish role was very brave, if you look back in history, at trying new things, trying to be at the forefront of venture seed, creating that infrastructure. And it feels like it's maybe stagnated a little bit. Other countries have in some way copied, they're competing, and now we have the high tech, which we haven't necessarily jumped on board with. And then you have the low cost economies, which are coming on stream. And we're sort of in the middle. So we need to find new ways to make sure we continue to have this hope of excellence that we don't see it tickle away over time. But, we speak English, we're very close. The same reasons that, people like to be here, it's an easy option if you're looking at Europe as, a landing pad where you're going to put your operations. Ireland still is attractive, I think.
You mentioned international funds being in there, and I kind of early experience when I was in Delta like 20 years ago. I used to go do a lot of I scoured around Scotland as part of my patch, and it was a thriving venture investment environment in Scotland in the early noughties. And I think the government kind of feared it was done and just switched off. And within 3 or 4 years, it was dead. It literally, and it hasn't recovered. I mean, SEP, for example, came down south, and it was so fragile. Back in Ireland, I think the role of the likes of ISIF, who've been an absolute catalyst in bringing the international funds, that creates problems. I think it certainly creates jealousy and animosity among the local funds. And having been in one, it was like, why can't we get that money? But it's serving a different purpose. I mean,
I think it's fantastic. I mean, we're now seeing interest in Ireland from funds that typically you'd really have had to drag them over here. And now they're actively on the ground. They're looking, they're intrigued, they're open to doing deals in Ireland. So look, it's all net positive. That said, that money may go elsewhere. I think having local, bigger funds also makes a lot of sense. And I know, IVC are obviously trying to unlock pension money, insurance money. There's just a phenomenal amount of money on deposit in Ireland. And I feel, we should be putting that to use for our own economy. But that's a bigger policy change.
Bigger policy, yeah. And we've got high net worths in syndicates who are doing it at the earlier stage as well. I mean, crowdfunding, which is small. I mean, I'd get it. Like, there's. This is very. The picture is rapidly changes, and there's never anything that's perfect. That's just not how these things go. Eamon, you actually mentioned some of the international companies, multinationals, the bards, who essentially started. They were the foundation for the sector. We kind of rotated out of IT, metal bashing for some of the big computer companies that then went, like DEC, which suddenly stopped manufacturing. What else do those multinationals? I think of the overseas network that they bring, expertise. The Irish overseas who want to come in. Like, how does that play out in the sector?
If you look at an awful lot of the early startups in Ireland, and even still today, like, the people that are manning those are coming from large corporates. I bet you if you went through the BioInnovate companies, I mean, the BioInnovate model is fantastic because you pay the mortgage while you're getting your startup up and off, and most of the time it's people in their 30s. But like, I would say a high percentage of those are coming from large corporate multinationals, and so they are huge repositories for talent that eventually come into the startup sector. And they've, as those companies developed in Ireland, I mean, it started off in the very early days in purely manufacturing. We were a low-cost labour market with English-speaking, well-educated people that allowed US multinationals to sell their devices in Europe. But then, those bases started to compete for R&D and regulatory jobs, and they started to kind of add the full functional expertise. If you want to hire a regulatory leader now, you're going to look to someone like Medtronic or Boston Scientific to go and hire them out of. And so that talent pool across all of the functions is really important. Kind of the startups depend on trying to poach them, and they're hard got because the corporates pay well, and they have good packages. And
from when you sold Nuravi, I mean, they basically J&J established a centre And
Correct.
how has that given people access then into the larger beast that is J&J at senior level? I mean, I can only imagine that's advantageous.
Well, interestingly, almost all of the senior management team from Nuravi stayed with J&J, and now that organisation is doing J&J's R&D worldwide for their neurovascular business. So they've really kind of pulled that in. Now, I was very careful the first couple of years. I behaved myself, but we've pulled one or two kind of key hires out of it. So we still look at it as a repository for talent. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. And I presume, I mean, when, as you're looking into the States, is there that network that you're able to feed into in terms of finding talent and finding people who can, help guide the way, either through direct hires, through consultants working at, we've got the Irish diaspora in hospitals, champions. I mean, is that a bit oversold, or is there something there?
There's something there, it's such a small community. We all know each other. I would easily reach out to any kind of Irish expat who's embedded in US medtech and ask their advice on something. But I think generally, go back to Eamon's point, it is the kind of the deep cluster and the good training level that the multinationals develop in Ireland. You've got a really solid base there. They're paid well, they're trained well. So really, if you're going to take someone from a multinational to a startup, like, they really want to do it, So I think it's a small percentage, probably 5 or 10% of that base that actually want to join a startup. You're getting the best of the best. So you're getting people who are really well trained, really well educated, and then they have the desire to join a startup. So I think we're very fortunate, really, to have that in our doorstep. We don't have to lean on, reaching out to, I guess, bringing people from other countries in and dealing with visas and stuff like that. It's just all there on the doorstep. Isn't that the definition of a cluster or a hub, Yeah.
No, absolutely. Speaking of hub, how do you think of as a hub? What is it? Is it a manufacturing hub? Is it a cardiovascular? I mean, where do you see it, or is it the range of services? Or, I think when we were chatting, Amy, you said the only constant is change. You just have to adapt. So we've gone from a very narrow base to where we are. How do you see it today, and where can it adapt? And then we'll chat later about what are the challenges.
I think a hub really is about a depth of expertise that runs, across different groups. So you've got companies that have specialism. You have universities that line up behind that. You have sub-suppliers and services that sit into it. And like, there are lots of hubs around the world. I was reading a thing recently that said 50% of payroll in Europe comes from hubs of one make, shape or form. So it's a really important component of wealth creation and employment. When you look at kind of that specialism, so I think about it as deep specialism. Like 90% of cardiovascular coronary stents are made of the world's coronary stents are made in Ireland. 50% of ventilators are made in Ireland, and that's a kind of a depth in very specific medtech sectors. Not in every sector, in very specific medtech sectors. And I think the same is happening in other hubs around the world, where those hubs specialise very deeply in one sector. I think that's a challenge for the evolution of the homegrown industries. You don't have 10 neurovascular companies in Ireland. You've got Wayne's company at the moment. You haven't got 10 heart failure companies. You have maybe 2 or 3. So that's that depth of synergy in some of those individual areas, but you have a lot of vascular companies, and so that is there in depth. So creating depth in a hub, I think, is really important.
How do you see it, Caroline?
I agree with that. It's just having everything around it. But then what I think Ireland brings is just everybody knows everybody, and you're only ever 2 phone calls away from getting an answer. If I can think of what makes a hub work, truly, it's that, because you'll have all your various cohorts of players. Takes a village, as you say, but being able to pick up the phone and know you can talk to somebody without it being something that seems, a monstrous task is huge. And I've seen that in everywhere I've worked, be it pharma. There's nothing you can't solve, really. If, within the ecosystem, there's going to be somebody that can help you. And I feel in this country, or in Ireland, we have access to that more so than others. There's more layers to get to the right people in other places.
You mentioned that biotech hasn't worked. Do you have any thoughts on why? I mean, I've always opinions, so will I let you go first?
Biotech. So I think, EI is phenomenal, and it's done a great job. If you think of the check size, I think it just simply doesn't work for biotech, whereas 2 to 5 million can get you a long distance of the way in medtech, and it can get you to the point that you've got something for real. And in biotech, that's not going to get you really anywhere for the most part. And so there's a gap still, right? So it just needs to be a bigger quantum, and we haven't quite figured that out. Plus, we don't have the skill set, the FDI, and it's very heavy manufacturing, it's regulatory. But, there's plenty of talent. It's just not in the translation, not in the chemistry, not in the early stage, and it just takes a lot of money.
I think almost going back to Eamon's point that there's essentially you don't need manufacturing. You can have a virtual biotech company anywhere in the world. All you need is internet connection.
Yeah.
So the execs can be one place, the manufacturing can be off somewhere else, your clinical trials is run somewhere else, your regulatory and compliance can be. You don't need presence. Whereas if you're manufacturing, you need presence. It's simple. And if you have all the contract suppliers into there, they have to be somewhere. And that's the whole biotech model has essentially become virtual, I think. Wayne, for you, thoughts on what is your thought about a hub from?
A couple of things there. Eamon talked about manufacturing. Like I do think we have a level of excellence in advanced manufacturing, and like I have recent experience of this. One of our contract manufacturers, they're always. This is, I think, probably one of the differences. Always trying to evolve, always pushing themselves, always trying to keep ahead. What can we do different? So they have developed a team that will basically build equipment to reduce your COGS, speed up manufacturing. They used to outsource that. It used to take 6 months. Big long process, get CE mark. They do that now in a couple of months, and they CE mark the machine on site. It's that sort of stuff that you don't get anywhere else. Like, we did a kind of a back of the envelope analysis looking at tariffs. If we move to the US and manufacture our devices there, the trade-off, it was no advantage to do that, because I guess the cost of goods and services and labour is higher in the US. So realistically, you've got, at the moment anyway, you've got really advanced high-end manufacturing. For us anyway, that's a key part of the hub. I think another important piece as well is, the folks who get exits, reinvesting. There's a reinvesting culture. When I started out with Embo, the first company, there was a MedTech Angels group. Now they tap out very easily because there's such a small community, but still, they're still there, right? And they want to give back and are interested. Eamon's done the same. Sol Niravi founded WhiteSwell. So there is that. That's a big part of our hub.
Yeah, I mean, certainly when I started in the sector, when I came back to Ireland a long time ago, there was no sector. So if I was looking for a job, I ended up doing biotech because there was simply nothing there. And you do have repeat entrepreneurs. Kind of a general thought, is it unlikely success? What could have derailed it as time passed? I mean, is it, we had a global financial crisis, made Ireland bankrupt. Everybody who had money, private investors, they all went bust because they were overloaded with debt. What have we avoided and managed to just keep going that could have knocked us out?
I think the hub in Ireland is still relatively young. I know 30 years is a long time, and I've aged in those 30 years. But when you compare it to some of the US hubs, it's still relatively young. Like I tend to think that there was, even very little US corporate manufacturing going on before the 1980s. It was the 1980s and 90s that you really saw the expansion of that. If you look at, I think very interesting to track is the patent landscape from Ireland. And so there were very few patents filed from Irish medtech industry up until the noughties. It started to tape off in the noughties. It hit a whole new level in 2010. And so 2010 is not that long ago. It's 15 years ago. So we're not that long as a very innovative sector. And so I kind of feel like we're still at the early stages of innovation. And so I think there are plenty of risks ahead. I do kind of feel that the large multinationals and the risks on that front are fundamentally important. Losing a lot of that, I think, would weaken the hub significantly. So I'd be watching that. I would hope to see a much greater presence of Irish indigenous manufacturing in the next two decades. I think that's the next phase of evolution, and I think that would help to kind of consolidate the sector. And I think there's a maturity in financing also. That's
Wayne,
well,
any
I'd agree.
thoughts?
Yeah, I think like the whole thing is rooted in the multinationals. You said what could have derailed it. If the multinationals left, that would have derailed it without a doubt. But like they've stayed and they've been there now for, some of them 40, 50 years. To Eamon's point, just making sure that advanced manufacturing is sustainable. It stays at that level of excellence, but you're not turning it into something that is not going to work financially. So it's these are all fine lines. They're all they feed each other, So it's hard to stand back sometimes and see what should be next. But I do think if we could bring more VCs in, more later stage money, keep the manufacturing solid, keep the US multinationals there, and I think basically, keep feeding the startups. I think Enterprise Ireland, they probably never say it, but it used to be all about jobs and return of tax. But I think realistically now they know it's almost like a VC mindset, even though they're not a VC, but we'll invest in 10 and 2 or 3 will work out and we'll still be good. I think they take that mindset and keep promoting that. That's probably the lifeblood of at least
I think
the
industrial
beginning.
policy is not, they're not trying to pick winners, they're saying the sector will support a sector.
Yeah.
Canon, you've mentioned before you mentioned here about the lack of support from a sales perspective. You just simply can't sell product. But if you even go back a bit further, I mean, we don't have a very good hospital system that supports clinical research. Nobody gets research time. We don't have electronic medical records. It's not like we're starting, we have lots of imperfection. How would you see that broader, gaps that will, I think, increase, they are a risk.
Absolutely. I mean, the fundamental issue is you can't do much in the Irish market, whether it's trialing or product or anything. And if I go, I like to go back to my pharma days sometimes, but I used to bang the drum a lot to get trials to Ireland and sell them on the concept of Ireland. And there's so many positives. I mean, so many of our clinicians are trained in the US. They bring that US mindset. They are literally like America and Europe. And, my German colleagues used to be completely perplexed when we were following US guidelines, not European guidelines. And so the trial for Europe was totally different. And then they started seeing us, and I hate to say it, but as the 51st state. And we were the place they could run studies in Europe, get used to that, but with their trial. And so that changed the metric for them. But, with that, you had to show you had capabilities. And it took a lot of promises. Some were an epic failure. I mean, some sites you'd have to ring every day to get them just to do their job. It was not plain sailing. But I think what pharma came to see was Ireland can be really good at certain things. We're really good at HTAs. We're very good at having pricing negotiations. And I feel for the medtech sector, if we can take some of that learning, maybe like the regulatory and the MDR, can we not, if we can be true experts even on that piece and make it as seamless as possible in what probably will be complexity, really staff up at a government level on regulatory expertise and just become the centre. We have to think outside of just FDI. There has to be other reasons for people to be here because we're dependable, there's less risk, and it'll be smooth and a simpler process. So it's looking at the whole, I guess, picture rather than just what's worked in the past, because you have to keep moving. Complacency will be our biggest enemy.
Take a break for a minute and ask, were there any questions from the audience? If you, Mr. O'Flynn. David.
So, first of all, thanks very much for a good panel. A couple of comments and then a couple of questions, if you don't mind. So, I think Eamon hit the nail on the head at the beginning. Look, it's 30 or 40 years of deliberate government policy with all of the wraparound, with the multinationals, with all of the supports around the supply chain and all of that kind of stuff. But one of the other things that's really very, very important is the educational infrastructure in the country. So there was a report recently in The Economist saying that 90% of 18 to 21-year-olds are in third level education in Ireland, and that's because we have a free university system. Right? But even underneath that, the same report said that at high school level, our school kids are ranking third in the world behind Japan and Korea in mathematical literacy. So I think that's a really, really important part. So you have to take all of that as part of the piece. So now the questions, leaving aside for a moment, the current administration in the US, where do you see the dark clouds gathering for the Irish medtech sector as we look forward?
Who wants to
I'd
do
have
that?
to start.
Fly.
You know, I would worry about the developments in China and India and the growing medtech sector there, and them becoming a really powerful competing force internationally. And I would also worry about pullback to the US. I think the combination of those two kind of concern me.
Yeah, no, spot on. I mean, again, in biotech, we're seeing China are winning increasingly and ever so, and I suppose medtech's the next place they'll come. So for me, that is the biggest threat on a number of fronts. And then I guess if relations, for whatever reason, between Europe and US deteriorate, that's a problem. And it's more a problem because maybe it will be a taser to Europe and we'll actually all start trying to act as one union finally. But I fundamentally can't really see that. So Europe will always be held back by the nature of how it's put together. That's why it works in some areas and why it's hard in others. And it's a complex market. So to the extent we can work together to have a more unified approach to reimbursement pricing and just make things more certain and less time consuming. We need to, I think, focus on that just to protect ourselves a little bit for what is emerging new world dynamics.
Wayne?
Yeah, nothing really to add to that. Like it's the, you know that phrase, I don't know which politician said it, closer to Boston than Berlin. So that door could be closing. And I think that was kind of Eamon's point, where the US becomes more insular. It's harder to crack in there.
Is there an advantage to be taken with MDR actually becoming resolved in some way? Because like Europe shot itself in the foot like so incredibly stupidly. Is that going to swing? I mean, all I see is more US. We feel more US-ier as my whole career has gone on. That everything is more US. So that's where the risk is.
I don't think it's resolved, that like it's still there. No. And if it changes, it's going to take years as well. So, if you just look, I'll just take my own example, if you looked at even the sales, the opportunity in the US versus Europe, they're not comparable, probably get a third of the price in Europe for the same device.
Sorry, Eamon.
I'm probably itching to comment on something
cool.
else. I think one of the biggest structural problems for Europe is its patent system. I love the US patent system. I think inventors get rewarded for their inventions in the US. In Europe, I think most patents are loss-making. Most patents are loss-making in general. Almost all patents in Europe are loss-making. Like in reality, when you file patents in Europe, you're filing it so that you can tick a box for an acquiring company when they ask you, have you got equivalent patents in Europe? Mostly they're worthless because the claims are too narrow and they're enforceable in kind of individual jurisdictions. If Europe got its act together and had a single patent that was inventor friendly and allowed you to have broad claim coverage for your invention, you would have a lot more European multinational medical device companies. It's a fundamental limitation.
Absolutely. Fair enough.
Thank you, Vincent.
Okay. And any other questions, please? Yeah.
I was originally going to talk about, you talked about clinical trials and one of my things is to control with data and have you considered things like digital clinical trials as a kind of like conduit? And to answer this question, it's control of the data within Ireland. I mean, I work with the agricultural section of Ireland and on sort of philanthropics and things like that, which I won't go down that rabbit hole, quite literally. But yeah, I think control of data, control of what's happening within Ireland is key to this, I think.
Sure.
Yeah, so we don't even have an Astoria.
Yeah, Europe and the US. I understand the Boston comment. That was hilarious. But yeah, I think control of that's really important. I think for Ireland and for the United Kingdom as well, there's a lot that we can both learn from each other, actually.
I agree. I mean, there's a very basic question. We don't have electronic medical records. Pretty hard to do electronic trials. Now, it's apparently coming through, and I'd love.
Yeah,
and by the way, we have massive. I know, but that's it. We've total schizophrenia about GDPR, and we have a regulator that has historically been considered being the whipping child of, you know, Meta and Google and everybody. So any thoughts on
Just
where that might go?
A single comment. Like I was talking to this gentleman earlier on today, and I was making the point that I don't know how many doctors I have spoken to over the year, and they say, you know, we've got this large repository of data, whether it's in stroke or in heart failure in our institution that we can mine, but actually they never share it. These are all kind of silos of data that exist in all sorts of places all over the world, and that are not been leveraged. And there is an enormous gap there for somebody to go and find a way to anonymize that data, use, you know, modern computing, artificial intelligence to actually do better diagnosis of patients and understand kind of patient outcomes on an individual patient basis. But, you know, I think that's a huge opportunity.
Few years, and so it's not. I mean, you say go 2 years in terms of the hub. So, and then that's what goes to my break on what's happening in Ireland, the UK, and Europe. To some extent, the USA, Canada. That you speak about a lot of stakes benefit from it. Big.
Cool. Yeah, we're out of time. One last question, if I may, which is okay. We're talking about the Irish hub. Is there any way you see that Ireland as a hub would work with the other European hubs? I think of Scandinavia, Switzerland, Dutch, the Israelis. I mean, anything formal? Are we all competing in our own little worlds?
I feel they are working together already. I mean, at a top level, right? And certainly I see this, obviously we're trying to get this biotech hub up and running now. Huge input from, you know, functional, successful hubs across Europe. They're all willing to help, give their advice. I think we're probably a bit further ahead on the medtech one, and maybe we can be the ones providing advice back. You're certainly competing, but you're not really at the same time. I think most of these hubs are funded by state money, who are very inward looking and trying to support their own economies. So I think you can learn from each other where possible.
I would agree with that too. You have vertical silos, but each of those hubs have their own vertical silo, their own areas of specialism, and so you can cross-pollinate those and create value.
I'd agree. Like Scandinavia, dialysis, imaging. You know, Ireland's cardiovascular.
That's it. We have our
Yeah.
And on that note, we'll leave it. Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you.
Right.